Wonderful.
All right, and welcome everyone. It's Jennifer Britton. I'm the author of the new book, Reconnecting Workspaces, Pathways to Thrive in the Virtual, Remote, and Hybrid World. We launched the book yesterday, and I say we collectively, I want to say a thank you to those that joined me for the official launch party. If you weren't with us live, you can always catch up on it at my YouTube channel. And you will find my YouTube channel under my name, Jennifer J. Britton, or under Effective Group Coach. So I'm doing a series of 4 calls this week. It is June 16th, 2021. I'll be doing another call tomorrow, Thursday, the 17th at 4 p.m. Eastern, and a final one on Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern. And really, this is my way of sort of starting to bring this work out into the world. Many of you listening in may be coaches or leaders, HR professionals. You've probably mastered or feel that you've mastered, remote work, but what about hybrid work? And that's what we're going to be talking about. So I've taken some of the more common questions that I've received, not just in the last year of the pandemic, but I've been working in the hybrid space for the last 3 decades. So I'm really zooming in this week's call, again, just after the launch of the book, I'm zooming into some of the more common questions. And as I shared yesterday, one of the biggest questions we've been getting at the Remote Pathways podcast, which I co host, has been about how do we build trust and safety, not only in a virtual environment, but also in a hybrid environment. So I want to take us into that today. If you've never met me before, I'm Jennifer Britton. I am a professional certified coach, and I am also a passionate author. 3 of my first 3 books, Effective Group Coaching, From One to Many, Best Practices in Team and Group Coaching, and then Coaching Business Builder, are really geared for professional coaches. And along the way, I wrote my 2017 book called Effective Virtual Conversation. This really reflected my passion for, bringing conversations out into the virtual space. And as I shared yesterday, so much of this is about how do we spark those great conversations, which are needed now. And that's really where this 2021 book, Reconnecting Workspaces, comes in. I want to say hi and welcome to Rosemary. She is back for another day. You can keep your video on. Just know that we are recording today. And for those that are listening in, I also wanted to give a bit of an overview of the book because yesterday I introduced it in terms of, what are we looking at? Today's topic is, of course, trust and connection, or the triad of trust, connection, and safety, as I call it, is chapter 5. So in chapter 5, like other chapters, you're going to see 6 common elements that go throughout the entire book. So the entire book, 448 pages, 21 very robust chapters. And it's really geared for professionals of all kinds to help you thrive in this ever changing environment, whether you're working remote, whether you're partially co located, or you are totally in a hybrid world where some people are on site, some people are off site. It's a very varied area. And so each chapter covers 6 core elements, as I said. And I want to just quickly raise these because I think it's important because in my writing, and again, with this being book 6 of my entire writing career, I write in a way that is not a read cover to cover, right? I am very much a robust writer. I'm also very practitioner focused. So I've spent my entire career either as a leader or a coach or facilitator helping people thrive in disrupted environments, whether it was on the front end of, post disaster management programming, whether it was on the front lines of environmental work in Central and South America, or whether it has been in my own business since 2004, helping organizations, teams, and business owners thrive. There's a lot of things that we can laser into, and there's a lot of things we can talk about. So this is where the 6 elements of every chapter comes in. I've created this book so that there are really these core elements, and each chapter starts off with a remote working principle. Regardless of how much change happens, and the world is ever changing right now, even on an hourly basis in many places, principles stay the same. And so that's why I start out each chapter with a principle. We also debunk a myth, and many myths, as I said yesterday, around remote work, hybrid work have really shifted in this last several months. Now, myths are great, but they may, they may sort of like resuscitate themselves in other ways and other formats. So a key part of hybrid success is always checking your assumptions. That is something that, as a leader of global teams, where and I didn't share this yesterday, but my last team that I managed had about 30 professionals, 26 nationalities, and 26 different technical layers of expertise. We all came from very different perspectives. And to be successful as a team, we needed to quickly find our common ground. And that's where having tools and practices which can facilitate conversation becomes so important, because we need those tools, we need those processes to help us really thrive. So each one of the chapters in Reconnecting Workspaces really digs into a different team tool that I hope you will be able to have dialogue and discussion around. Now, that is great. Tools are great, but we also want to make sure that we're really tapping into how people learn and how people relate, how people really integrate the world. And so each chapter is also anchored in a brain tip. As someone who was trained in the area of cognitive psychology back in the late 1980s, early 1990s at McGill University, I so appreciate how neuroscience has continued to expand and also, also validate the things that we knew even 3 decades ago. Many of those things were the things that I put into practice as a leader. And I've always kept my eye on, like, how do we help people through moments of disruption? How do we help people who may not ever come together really do their best work? Because for a lot of us, for a lot of organizations, for a lot of teams and leaders and individual contributors, it matters. Our work really matters. And this book is truly dedicated to all of you. So there's brain tips as well as 6 questions in each chapter. I call them 6 questions for conversation that you can be incorporating, because a lot of times we're not stopping. We're not stopping to pause and have the discussions that matter. And so each chapter, for example, around emotional intelligence, there are 6 questions in that chapter to spark the conversation around emotional intelligence. In the chapter around feedback and performance management, there are 6 questions to start talking about what does like performance management mean for us as a team. Even that term, like, what does that mean for us? We need to make so much of this, our experience, which again could be in that one location or across distance. So I know a couple of you listening in today really want me to talk more about the hybrid. We're going to get to that in a moment, because key to making a hybrid experience work is really having the trust and safety needed. And another part of this chapter focus is going to be on having a reconnecting tip. So there's 21 different reconnecting tips that literally readers can activate, whether you're a business owner, whether you're an organization, whether you're reading it as a leader, or even as a team member and individual contributor. And I think one of the most exciting things that has shifted in some organizational contexts has been a recognition that, leaders play an important role, but so do team members. Team members are like the weakest or strongest link of a team. And we need to empower and equip all of our team with skills and experiences as appropriate. Yesterday, I shared some of the sort of the writing spark for this body of work, which was really the digital dozen, which are characters that are going to be underpinning this whole work. You can meet them in the Remote Pathways podcast that I co-host. And in fact, on that, we've done 2 calls on trust, safety, and connection in recent months at the Remote Pathways podcast. So if you like to listen to a podcast, head on over to remotepathways.com, or you can listen to it on your favorite podcast player. But one of the things we've really seen is, for conversations to truly happen, especially when people are across distant, we need to have trust. And trust is always illustrated how? Behaviorally. The challenge with building trust in a virtual or hybrid space is we see each other in these little windows of our world. So I'd like you to start thinking about, how are you building trust? If you're part of a team, what are the behaviors that are signaling that we trust each other? We don't have the water cooler, right? Unless we create a virtual water cooler. So when people go back to the office, we really want to be aware of how do we ensure that everyone's in the conversations that matter. And if we are having conversations literally in the physical environment, how are we ensuring that we're feeding those forward to our team members that might be remote? So intentionality is key to any sort of hybrid work experience. We need to be intentional on what we're doing, when we're doing it, how we're doing it, and making sure that we have this constant stream of communication. When I say constant stream of communication, that can be overwhelming. So we need to look strategically at what does a constant stream of communication mean? Is it synchronous or real time? Or are we starting to leverage some of the asynchronous components to communication? When I say asynchronous, if you start looking around and listening, a lot of organizations are starting to activate what is known as asynchronous leadership and asynchronous communication. In brief, what it means is not real-time communication. So they may be using apps, they may be using portals to have discussions in different ways. Instead of bringing everyone into a meeting, what they might be doing is doing some of that with audio sound bites. Like, so imagine a walkie-talkie, right? I like this example. We recently interviewed someone at the Remote Pathways podcast. We've interviewed a few organizations, including, I'm trying to think of who we've interviewed. There's the Commons, and there's another app that we heard from the founder, which is more like a walkie-talkie, right? So it's like, imagine giving a verbal message. And, you know, Rosemary, if I wanted to get in touch with you, I could send that off to you. You could choose whether that's like a real-time receipt of that audio message, or whether it goes almost like into a mailbox or a, you know, your inbox, so that you can listen to it when you need it. Because one of the distractions that we've seen, which has impacted trust, safety, and connection, is being on all the time, right? People are getting totally burnt out with like having to listen all the time. So think about how you can be changing communication methods. And this needs to be designed across a team in terms of what are our agreements? What are the things we've agreed to communicate live in real time? And if we're going asynchronous, what are the appropriate things to be communicating in those more asynchronous or not real time moments? So all of this has implications for trust, safety, and connection, right? If I'm being bombarded now, instead of getting like having live team meetings and getting like this whole new inbox of audio messages, that's not going to work either. So are we creating, you know, feedback loops to ensure that we're really saying, you know what, I feel connected, or I actually feel more disconnected now because of our new processes? So I'm going to just stop here, because I've done, and again, listening over at the Remote Pathways podcast, you can hear me talk about recently around, you know, behaviors that build trust, safety, and connection. But I'm sure we've got Lorna on the line. We've also got Rosemary on the line. Lorna, I know you shared with me like hybrid work is something you're looking at supporting. And so when it comes to what I've just shared, what are you intrigued by or curious about?
A couple of things. I work fairly extensively with intentionality as well. And so it's lovely to hear you talk about that. And then I'm interested in the constant stream of communication, what I would have called consistent stream of communication. And the asynchronous was not a term that I was particularly familiar with. Yeah. And then the need to build safety and trust, because the areas in which I work, I'm always looking for more and better resources in building trust and safety, because I work with people in sometimes what they feel are not at all safe arenas.
Yeah, and there's quite a few pieces there, right? There's the asynchronous, there's like, how do we support others to build the trust, build the safety? If you head on over to remote, I keep saying Remote Pathways, if you head on over to the new book site, which is reconnectingworkspaces.com, on the first page of that, I sort of call it in chapter 5, a trust indicator. And it gives 5 or 9 different behaviors. I'm just going to go to the next screen, because I've done a bookmark around this very topic. I'm just going to see if I can find the bookmark here. Probably can't, but on the back of the bookmark is the 9 behaviors. Here we go. So ways to build trust in the hybrid world, right? Practically and tactically, how do we walk the talk? What does walking our talk look like? What does it look like if we're on site, i.e., at the physical hub, wherever that hub might be? And then what does walking our talk look like in the virtual space? So we need as a team to really look at these 9 behaviors, how we're doing it individually and how we're doing it collectively. So if people are interested, and I shared this yesterday, if you want a copy of the bookmark, because it doesn't come up very well resolution wise, happy to send one in the mail. If you want to just email me, info@potentialsrealized.com. I should be getting a shipment in next week, and I'll be happy to send 1 or 2 in the mail to you, because I think it's things like this, good reminders, like, are we walking our talk? If I've said I'm going to follow up, like, am I actually following up? If I say we need to be more inclusive, am I being inclusive with my language? Am I being inclusive with my techniques? How are we doing on a walk the talk? And how is that translating for the people that I might be physically together with or virtually in conversation with? Remember, virtually things get magnified. This was a big message that I covered in Effective Virtual Conversations. And I've spent a lot of time in the last 3-4 years with groups, with teams, getting them to think about what's getting magnified in your virtual environment. People just see our little 2x3 screen. So what's even being communicated? By our body language, by what we're saying, by our experience and context that we're choosing to show. Second one, boosting trust, fairness, equity. Are we appearing fair? Fairness is a big word. And so it can be useful as a team to really be talking about, what does it mean to be fair? What does fair look like, sound like, from a process perspective as well? And then number 3, build on strengths, right? How are we building on people's strengths? We know that the world will continue to change. And so it's easier for us to magnify our strengths than to try and mitigate against our weaknesses. So building on strengths can boost trust. It can also be a great connector, as many coaches would assert, right? We allow people to lean into their strengths and share their strengths and mirror back to others, like, I see this strength in you. That's something that builds that trust, safety, and connection. It also helps us when we take ownership of things that work well and ownership when things don't work well. So how are we also owning and being transparent with things? And then always, as you said, Lorna, being intentional with connection, setting clear expectations, because if things are not clear, we make up our own stories. We also want to make sure we're communicating. So to your point, communicating constantly, communicating asynchronously, that will depend. That will really depend on the agreements we put in place. And I think this is where teams need to revisit, especially as workspaces reopen or move into a next phase. What is acceptable and what is not? Is there an expectation that it's okay to receive messages at 6 a.m.? Or is it understood that if I send you a message at 6 a.m. because that's when I need to work, that you will attend to it on your own time? Because what we've seen in this last year plus of the pandemic is people just working around the clock rather than saying, you know what, I'm going to do this when I'm on and I know you're off, but you don't have to like respond to it. It's there. And that's where some of this technology is coming in to fill the void, so that people feel like they can go offline and it's okay, because they'll pick up that thread, they'll pick up their message in more than just a text only way. And finally, another way to boost trust is, of course, like holding regular one-on-ones. What are we doing to keep the conversation rolling? And it's in those spaces, whether it's a peer-to-peer or a leader-to-peer, that I think really we start surfacing the things that are working and not working. And if we're not holding regular one-on-ones, the little molehills become mountains, right? They become the things that really start becoming the big conflicts that exist within a team. So Rosemarie, it's great to see you here this afternoon. What are you curious about, or what are you thinking about as you?
Well, actually, what I'm thinking about is how to, I think the virtual space is going to be permanent for a while. I mean, not for a while, it's permanent. So
Permanent,
uh,
exactly.
is developing those skills and tools
Mhm.
to convey messages in the most appropriate way. And Lorna is my collaborator, and we're working on a project for training coaches in the space of diversity and inclusion. And I think we're gonna have to be doing our work online. It's gonna be virtual, and that's why in our course I've been plaguing you about. So how do I need the exercises. I need how to engage people and
Yep.
in that space. And you are also aware of you including being inclusive and incorporating people with different needs. It's not only races and cultures, but people are terrified of the virtual space. I mean, including someone like me. I keep saying I have technophobia. I'm overcoming it in some ways, but if there are too many technical things going on in one session, it throws me off. So that could happen with any other person. So I'm interested really in learning how to have enough to engage the audience, but not and to remember to make people feel inclusive.
Yes.
And not because with the younger ones, they just go click, 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 click. It's okay. They don't mind all the changes, go here, go there, read this, whatever.
Yes.
So yeah, so that's what my interest is in. And I wanted to introduce Lorna to your work anyway. So that's why I asked you if I could invite her, and then I sent her.
I'm so glad you did, because we've got a small audience, but a listening audience too. And I'm going to just go ahead to a little bit later, because I think some of these principles, going back to the principles that I shared yesterday, right? These are some of the virtual principles. Of course, Zoom is acting up. I'm going to not end the meeting, but you're not seeing my screen, and I'm not seeing my screen. The virtual principles are things that can really help us, right? Because these are the things that we can lean into. So being really strong on process. And so strong on process, to your point, Rosemary, in Reconnecting Workspaces, I share a couple of things. There's something I call the 5 levers of engagement, right? And in the Standout Virtually Challenges last year, I was talking a lot about these. So how are we activating breakouts? How are we activating polling? How are we activating chat? How are we activating annotation? And also, how are we using whiteboard? So to your question earlier around what are the things we can use? Are we making sure that from a process standpoint, the strong process standpoint, that we're using tools appropriately and not overusing them? Because we really want to use that to create connection, whether it's connection across a group or a team. Virtually and hybrid, we need to overconnect in many ways, because we're going to typically drive for results, but we need to have those results through our relationships, right? I need to understand that, in our group, Lauren is going to be the expert on this, and Rosemary is going to be really skilled in that. So it's so important that we engage people regularly, that we don't get stuck on the screen, right? That we actually stop and say, let's come out and have a discussion in the Hollywood Squares view, so that we can then go back and do work, whether it's one-way passage of information, or can we use a whiteboard, right? I think a lot of people don't use the whiteboard in the room. We could do a lot of things here. We could create some images. We could create some timelines. I could be using the drawing tool, and I could be saying, okay, in our conversation right now, we're going to look at a rocky road, right? We've got 2 parts. There's something blocking us. Let's put into this space what's getting in the way of our roadmap right here. And we could use annotation in the whiteboard to have everyone in the room identifying what's in this gap, what's in this space where things are getting broken down. That's a working session, right? And it's where we need to bring in the voices, whether it is all remote or all virtual or hybrid, because in the hybrid space, people are going to see some things differently. And it's important that we have that information flow. There might be, two layers. We could even use two colors here, right? We could say, okay, so from a hybrid landscape, what is getting in the way on the blue? And in an in-person realm, what's happening in the red? Maybe it's not just in-person and virtual. Maybe it's location A, which is red. Maybe it's also location B. We could have like another in-person location, right? So there's another hub, and there might be even a third hub on top of that. So it can get really complex, which is why one of the principles is keep it simple, right? Keep it simple. But to make it visual, right? To make this really explicit now, having a diagram, having a shared experience, a shared visual that we can then all activate and talk about and talk through, that creates new learning and new shared mental models, which we know from research are absolutely essential to move forward as a team. So let me check in and just see what's getting activated with both of you. Lorna, what are you thinking in terms of,
Well, I was thinking of two places that I'm engaged with that are getting ready to do hybrid work. We've been working entirely virtually with Zoom and then whatever else, but basically Zoom. And that is my church, which has been having services online. And we're going to be going on July 4th back into the center. And we realize that there are about 15 or 20 people who are attending on Zoom, that it's kind of hard for them to come to services. They live 70 miles away, or they're recently disabled and haven't worked that stuff out, So we're looking at how to be a hybrid church. And the other is I'm a business advisor through the Small Business Development Center. And, we serve two counties. One of the counties is about 120 miles long, and the other one's about 60 miles long. And both of them are about 65 or so miles wide. That's a lot of territory.
It's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
how can we be hybrid and serve the people who are out in the remote areas while still having the in-person at the office?
I love it. I think Rosemary, you said something earlier around, like people have mastered the skills now, right? Most people now have a much higher level of confidence in using the tools of Zoom. So in terms of servicing, like in your example there, Lorna, of like just the vast geography, right? People are now open to saying, oh, yeah, we could offer hybrid service days, right? Or there might be in the office days to really balance that workflow. Unlike early 2020, right? I was a few weeks before the pandemic, I went into a grocery store and people know me there and they were like, oh, you're in a little bit early today. You must not be working. I'm like, no, I'm working. I've got 2 calls. And they're like, what, you have calls? You work from home? What do you mean by that? And this was literally like January of 2020. They now know. I saw that same person a few weeks ago. She's like, I really am getting an understanding now of what you've done all these years. And it's just like, it's the way of the world. But how do we bring voices in? How are we intentional and planned with what we need to achieve with our results? And that's a whole other conversation that I'll do another session on in terms of like results-based management. That's really been a big shift in this space because we've got to get very granular on output success measures, which aligns nicely with coaching, really aligns nicely with coaching. So
Rosemary and I are partnering to do some work that I'm just really excited about. And she's in Toronto and I'm in Northern California. So yes, we're going to be working virtually for maybe everything we do. Who knows?
Well, I have a business partner in Michigan, right? And I'm in Toronto as well. And we've been able to build out since 2014 an amazing series of programming. It's called the Mentor Roadmap. And what we've been able to serve in terms of our own geographic locations too has been really amazing. And we get together once every couple of years physically. But the rest of it, it's all virtual, right? And so if you have trust, back to trust, safety, and connection, our focus of today, you can really make that work with open conversation. So we're almost
Okay.
at the end of our time. Any other questions you wanted us to look at, Rosemary or Lorna? I'm so glad you came in, because for you as a partnership, right, this trust, safety, and connection, you might have noticed back, and I won't bring up the slide, but there's also, respect and influence. That's
Yes.
another piece of, like,
Yeah.
I call it the TRI. And so really, to build trust, we need to have respect of each other, respect of our differences, celebration of that. And we need to use the skill of influence in a very sort of, I would say, ethical and very intentional way, right? Like we cannot micromanage people. We have to micro monitor. We have to really empower people. And that's a huge paradigm shift for many organizations and professionals. This is where coaching also comes in. How do we ensure that we're having the dialogue together and really, listening for what our partners need, responding to that, asking questions to uncover what we can't see, because all we see is this little screen in front of us. So what are you both taking from today's call? Rosemary, what are you taking from the call today in terms of application in your world?
Actually, I like that triangle that you created about trust and influence and respect. That image stands out in my mind, the taking away. Also, what stands out is, again, the use of tools, but to be aware of the participant group and what their needs are. So the tools are catered for them to learn in the best way possible. And I'm so glad I came again today. So
Well,
thank you for sharing.
my pleasure. You could come back tomorrow or the next day live, or, so many people will watch this video down the road. I've
Yes, yes.
we are an asynchronous world. So unless I hold the space for these conversations, they just don't happen. And it doesn't matter whether it's just a handful, a few, or many, it's always valuable to bring people together for conversation. And I think that's another important part of this discussion.
Yes.
Don't
Oh,
undervalue
yes,
the
yes.
impact. Live is just as powerful as on demand in many respects. So, Lorna, how about you? What are you taking from our call today?
One thing that as an author myself, one of the things that I particularly valued was what you covered in the beginning, was that in each chapter, you have 6 areas that you break it down into, and that among those 6 things is 6 questions. And so it's a structure that I'm sure people who access your work will value, because it's, maybe not everybody, but certainly it's a structure I would value. And so I was curious about that, and saw a little bit of comparability, because I had a structure that I was working with my book when I wrote it.
Nice.
And, having a quote, and then some introducing, and then some revealing of the content of the chapter, and then coaching questions and resources for every chapter. So it was interesting seeing your breakdown.
The formula, as I like to say, and it's a formula to create consistency. So the word
Yeah.
you raised earlier, right? One of the things that's so important in this remote and hybrid world is, what's the consistency we're creating? Because there is so much unknown or uncertainty. And so in a future call, I'll talk and bring to life the 7 remote enablers, which I spent a lot of time talking about last year. Some of you may have accessed my remote working white paper, which came out in February of 2020, before the pandemic really hit at least North America. And in that work, in that body of work, which I brought into Reconnecting Workspaces, I talk about 7 enablers, 7 real levers for remote teams or hybrid teams that we could be thinking about. And consistency is one, communication is another. They're all the 7 C's to remote work. So I'll do another call on this, but tomorrow we're going to talk team tools. If you're free at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, Thursday. And then Friday, I'll be doing bring all voices into the room. So, back to the 5 engagement levers. How do we really bring people's voices in? And that'll be it for this week. Then I'll move to a bi-weekly call schedule, and those will happen on Mondays. Have to still figure out the time, but stay tuned on the website, which is reconnectingworkspaces.com, or you can always find me on Facebook, still under Effective Group Coach. You'll notice I keep going to Effective because that's always my handle, but this is Reconnecting Workspaces. So with that, thank you. Hope you'll be back tomorrow.
Thank you.
Have a great
Thank
afternoon.
you.
We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.
Bye.